Hello, I am Ranjamrittika. I am a final year DPhil student at the Faculty of Oriental Studies, University of Oxford. My doctoral research focuses on a diachronic study of devotional yoga traditions in northeastern India through a common lineage of Buddhism and Hinduism. My work explores mysticism and language and combines literary criticism with ethnography. I also study politics of alternative social imaginaries through religious movements, while foregrounding the pluralist literature of dissent and its artistic and political implications through performance. The year could have been 750 CE. There was a massive raging fire. The palace was burning. The fire had ravaged everything. People were fleeing. The sudden invasion had left everyone in shock. There was one man who was fleeing, but more than his life, he was on a quest to preserve his memory through his art. It was an unfinished piece, which was the culmination of his life's artistic pursuits. This man ran for days across the vast terrains of forests, rivers, crossed the borders, and arrived at the foot of the mountains. Locals used to call it Nepalaya, foothills of the Himalayas. After days of trials, things gradually calmed down. It all came down to that man's one sole mission, to sculpt that face of a smiling being. Was it a man or a woman? The face that no one had seen but only heard of. A face that was his inspiration amidst all the chaos, suffering, loss, and violence. He had been carrying that half-sculpted block of stone with him throughout. The face embodied compassion, an emotion that had perhaps the power to contain the war and the hate in the first place. The man's only redemption was that half smile, which he wanted to immortalize through his art. He sculpted for days until he gave form to that face of the compassionate one, Buddha Avalokiteshvara. His memory was enshrined through that smiling face, who continues to amuse his spectators until this day with that mystic smile. You are beholding the sublime standing figure of Avalokiteshvara, or the Buddha of compassion, with his stone stele, depicting a strong and elegant posture sculpted in Lichavi period in Nepal that thrived between 3rd and 8th century CE. This was an imagination of the story of the Lichavi dynasty in Nepal's history, which was founded by immigrants from India who came to Nepal to escape political persecution in the country of their origin. The early part of the 7th century was characterized by great sculptural achievements in Nepal as in India. The masterpieces of this period provided inspiration for Nepali sculptors for the next 500 years. And the figure in front of you is a stellar example of that craftsmanship. The stele with Avalokiteshvara holding a lotus is made of grey chloride stone and is located in room 32 of the India 600 to 1900 gallery in the Ashmolean Museum. Here the Buddha blesses a female devotee with his boon-bestowing gesture as she kneels in prayer at his feet. Have you ever thought what compassion would look like if that emotion was embodied in material form? Compassion, a form of transcendental wisdom, an ability to see past shallow appearances and see and understand human suffering, is one of the 4 sublime states that the Buddha preached about. Mahayana, one of the main existing branches of Buddhism, preaches that Buddhas like Avalokiteshvara, the figure of compassion, are great beings who continually manifest the aspiration to achieve enlightenment or complete liberation from suffering and constantly endeavors for the sake of all. Therefore, he, or for some followers, she, is a supremely important figure in the Buddhist pantheon. In the context of Mahayana Buddhism, compassion has a very specific meaning. It stems from empathy and upholds an understanding of the universal desire for compassion, freedom from suffering, and an aspiration for happiness. In the Lotus Sutra, which is one of the most popular and influential scriptures of Mahayana Buddhism, the 25th chapter recounts that Avalokiteshvara adopts many forms of a man, woman, child, monk and performs various services like granting children, quelling storms, and warding off calamities in order to support those who follow him or her as you may. The compassionate nature of the Buddha's abilities in the Lotus Sutra indicate a remarkable fluidity not only in his physical appearance and social status, but also in his gender identity. If you look at the figure closely, you will notice a small lotus ascends from the base, indicating a readiness to rise, yet a sense of equilibrium. In the royal crown, a tiny Buddha sits above the forehead. At the same time, a band secures the placement of his right leg in proper meditation posture, a sign that he is also spiritually adept and engaged in meditative practices. His gaze, in fact, indicates that he is absorbed in contemplation, while his outstretched palm is a gesture of benevolence directed towards those in front of him. With almost miraculous equipoise, he is simultaneously inwardly and outwardly reflective. Standing before him, the believer encounters the Buddha who inspires the devotee's own inherent capacity for wisdom and compassion. From the Buddhist perspective, every human being is familiarized with suffering, sickness, old age, and death. But as human beings, according to the Buddhists, we have the capacity to transcend our suffering. In recent years, the Dalai Lama has been stressing on emotional disarmament, or in his words, the ability to see things realistically and clearly without the confusion of fear or rage. In the context of a global pandemic, I quote the Dalai Lama. As a Buddhist, I believe in the principle of impermanence. Eventually, this virus will pass, as I have seen wars and other terrible threats pass in my lifetime, and we will have the opportunity to rebuild our global community as we have done many times before. End of quote. It also reminds us that a compassionate or constructive act, whether working on the front line or just observing social distancing, has the potential to help many. Is there a facet of the aesthetic that can enhance the education of emotions? I leave you with the question that does a museum object have the potential to evoke an emotional state?